Well, thanks for coming, everyone. Thanks to everyone online. This is Writers and Books Visiting Author Series. My name is Dan Hurd. I'm the Director of Adult Programs. If you're not familiar, Writers and Books is a nonprofit literary arts center in Rochester, New York. We offer readings, workshops, and literary programming for people of all ages and backgrounds. Find more information on our website, wab.org. Writers and Books would like to call attention to the complex and troubled history of the lands on which we live and work. We are hosting this event from the unceded ancestral homelands of the Onondaga, or the people of the Great Hill. In English, they are known as the Seneca people, or the keeper of the Western Door. We're so happy to have Francesca Padilla with us today. First, we'll hear her read, then she'll be in conversation with Sejal Shah. Sejal Shah is a writer, interdisciplinary artist, and teacher. Her debut essay collection, This Is One Way to Dance, was an NPR Best Book of 2020 and is now available as an audiobook. One of her essays will be performed at Jiva in Interloops, Monologues on Place, next week as a part of the Rochester Fringe Festival. The recipient of a 2018 New York Foundation for the Arts Fellowship in Fiction, Sejal is also the author of the forthcoming story collection, How to Make Your Mother Cry. The writer Nova Ren Suma has said, propulsive, fearless, and filled with heart-aching revelations, what's coming to me is a beautiful debut by a scorching new voice in YA fiction. This is the thrill ride of a coming-of-age story, one that grabbed me by the throat, but most of all, moved me to the core. Francesca Padilla is a Dominican-American fiction writer born and raised in New York City. She is the recipient of a Walter Dean Myers grant from We Need Diverse Books and holds a BA in creative writing from the State University of New York at Purchase College. She lives with her family in Rochester, New York. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Please welcome Fran Padilla.
Thank you to me. So I'm still going to use this because I feel like it makes me feel special. So I decided that I'm going to read the author's note first, and then dive a little bit into a part of the story. The author's note is something that I wish that, so in the I don't know who has seen the ARC version, the Advanced Reader's Copy version, but it's actually in the beginning of the story. But I moved it to the end, but I kind of wish that I didn't do that because apparently it really sets the tone for the book. So I really like, I want to kind of return to that, to the importance of the author's note, which I haven't thought about for a long time, but is really important to me and kind of keeps me grounded in why I wrote this. Okay. Dear reader, when my mother was very young, she underwent open heart surgery for a rare defect she'd had since birth. It was the 1970s in the Dominican Republic. Living still wasn't guaranteed, and childbirth was basically prohibited for her due to the possibility she might not survive. She fixed her heart temporarily, and then she fell in love, and finally she took her chances and had me, and later on, my little brother. Her pregnancy terrified people. When I first had the idea for what's coming to me, I was only a couple of years older than Minerva, its protagonist. I'd grown up, was still growing up, with a chronically ill parent and seeking books about kids with chronically ill parents. I was also very poor, very brown, and very angry. I didn't know it at the time, but what I was looking for was a book on anticipatory grief. It's a subset of grief, the type we feel in advance of the actual ending, when we can see it coming, even if it's far away. Since my mother was seriously ill for most of my childhood, grief was around just as long, not so much a friend, but a companion, sometimes a co-conspirator, and other times an opponent, one more worthy than anything made of flesh. People familiar with grief are likely to also be familiar with this complicated dynamic, its infinite faces, how we perceive it, interact with it, and are influenced by it. We know that every instance of grief is unique because every life and relationship is unique. I craved a reading and later writing experience that would give voice to this. I concluded that I'd write about all this someday and then set it aside. When I returned to it years later, my mother had passed away. The idea solidified. And so this book is about every kind of grief, about how once it happens, it's always happening. I didn't mean to write about anger or being young and poor and brown in the suburbs either, but this book became about all of those things too. The final piece for me was its escapism and ultimately its joy. This book is a whole voyage and I'm really glad you're here for it. Francesca Padilla. So I'm going to read part of a chapter. And this is a chapter that, just to kind of back up a little bit, I think everybody here knows what the book is about. It's about a girl who lives in a fictional Long Island town called Nautilus, New York. She feels very stranded there. She is, her mom's been hospitalized a bunch and she's kind of been left to her own devices. The only thing she has going on for her is this job at the ice cream store that becomes a focal point of the story. But there's one scene, and the book is set in summertime, and there's one scene that takes place in school, just one, even though it's a young adult book. And so everybody kind of knows about the ice cream heist, and everybody kind of knows about the grief and that part of the story, but I don't really get to talk that much about the educational aspect of things, like what she was losing when she lost her ability to go to school. So I wanted to highlight that. This is chapter 6. And she's in school, the only chapter that takes place in school. Okay. And this is summer school.
Fran, what page is that?
That is page 35. Okay. Page 35. Okay. Out of habit, I head straight for the main office where information is exchanged without the guilt that's unavoidable with teachers and counselors. The hallways are quiet, the air thin and moist and oddly cool despite the lack of air conditioning. Now that I'm here, this feels doable. Maybe I can, in fact, start over again. I tell the woman at the front desk my name and that I was supposed to start school 2 weeks ago, summer school. Technically, a week and a half, I add, as if that makes one iota of a difference. Hang on a second, she says. She eyes me up and down. Are you second starts? I resent the assumption, but also her assumption is right. And I hate her a little bit for that as well. I look down at my outfit, cut off shorts, actual jeans I cut above the knees that are now fraying admirably, and a thin cotton t-shirt with a watercolor of a mongoose on the front. I wish I had that shirt in real life. Anyway, my most prized dollar bin clothing item. She sets down the phone she was holding. They'll have more information for you in the guidance office. My second starts counselor is a woman with a fake tan, helmet hair, and a comically raspy voice that rattles the outdated papers on the bulletin board above her desk. She insists on being called Mrs. Delgado. Please always say Mrs., never say Ms. She emphasizes this as Ms. while skimming the file on her computer screen, probably for the first time ever. Somewhere inside among the data and pixels is an alternate reality Minerva Gutiérrez, a version they think they know, whose actions are of a lot more importance than those of the one sitting in this chair. Minerva Gutiérrez, formerly gifted, currently poor, and a total degenerate. Before everything changed, my favorite subjects were chemistry. I liked the balance of it, my debate elective, and sometimes language arts. Before everything changed, I was going to take AP classes. If I couldn't get into college in New York City, I'd go to school as far away as reasonably possible. The plan was supposed to be Greater Nautilus High School, then college, then a job. I didn't realize how fragile the plan was all along, how comforting it was to have until I got in trouble. Then a piece was taken away and the entire plan collapsed. Minerva, Mrs. Delgado intones, what happened to your attendance? I haven't been feeling well. This feels true enough. I couldn't sleep, and then I found a sleeping pill in Mom's room, and it hit me like a hand forcing my head underwater. I remember that numb, wavy feeling just before the blissful loss of consciousness and yearn for it now. Well, I must say you look exhausted, she quips. I bite down on a response. It feels like a trick invitation. You've missed quite a lot of days this summer term. All of them, as a matter of fact. She moves on, clicking through more information. She squints at the page as if to make sure of the number, then widens her eyes, impressed. Absent 62 days in the past school year. She peers over at me expectantly. Yep. She clicks again. I remember you now. Assault and attempted robbery of a fellow student. You could have been charged for real, you know. I know. That's not what really happened, but I've learned with most adults it never helps to set things right, especially when it comes to one's own good name. I see you didn't attend the tutoring sessions during your expulsion period, she says. Why? She means the tutoring sessions forced on me by the school district intended to keep me caught up. These were scheduled at the Nautilus Point Library, 2 trailers back to back on a lot behind an older building that used to be a real library until the hurricane before last. The one time I went, the college student volunteer didn't know what a homonym was, which caused me to question the validity of the entire system. Mom would have come to the same conclusion. Mrs. Delgado moves on while I'm still trying to figure out how to answer. She locks her hands over the desk. I know you've been through a lot, Minerva. I hope very much for your sake we can find a place for you. She waits for me to respond, but all I can think is that Second Starch is supposed to be the place for me. Mom saw to it when she last met with the school. That plus Mrs. Delgado is one of those people who uses names like punctuation marks. Yeah, me too, I mumble. She half nods as if that'll suffice. We only want the best for all of our students from Nautilus Point. Give them the support they need to become productive members of society. I could scream at the words, the lipstick smile, the fake reassuring tone. Why can't she just talk to me like a person instead of a brochure? Some people, she continues, might be better suited for alternative programming. At this, my temples sting, which used to signal tears coming. What's that mean, alternative programming? Well, the local opportunity center has a wonderful high school equivalency program, for instance. A cold wave knocks me over. Are you saying I have to drop out? There are only so many resources we can provide in Second Starts. Some people, Mrs. Delgado repeats, her voice thinning, just aren't a good fit. The words are thick in my throat. But I'm here now. She looks directly into my eyes. I'm afraid it's too late. All I can think about is Nicole insisting that I haven't been trying. I clench my hands, containing the heat of what feels like all my 17 years. Deep breaths, count to 10, 15, 20. None of it makes a difference. Does this make sense? Mrs. Delgado asks what I'm saying to you. No, I shake my head. The cold wave has turned me upside down. I mean, yeah. Wonderful. I'll be sending some paperwork in the mail for your parents. I mean, whoever, to review. You take care.
Thank you so much. How to do this?
Yeah, you know what? I realized that almost all of my. Here, I'm gonna move so I can see you a little bit better.
Sure.
Almost all of my events were on Zoom, except for actually one at Writers and Books. So I'm used to looking out. I haven't done this in person. Fran, that was a wonderful reading, and I have lots of questions for you. But I thought maybe I'd start with your author's note.
Sure.
And it was really interesting to hear you read that. I was listening to your book on audiobook, and it was great to hear it both that way and to read it. But what was that? What was it like? When did you write the author? Is it the author's note or the note to the reader?
Oh,
I thought those were the same thing.
You know, maybe they are. This is something that I spent a lot of time thinking about because I didn't have something like that in my first book. And in my second book, there was should there be an author's note? Is there not an author's note? And so it was something that I ended up talking a lot with editor and agent and thinking about myself. So I'm just curious, with fiction, some people, sometimes it's like you shouldn't have to. I found it very helpful to read your note to the reader, or the author's note. So
yeah.
I'd love to hear a little bit about your thinking about that.
Yeah, I can definitely talk about that. So the author's note really, I didn't think it was going to be important at all. It was just at one point, they were like, well, we're putting together these soft cover, these advanced readers copies. So if you're not familiar with an advanced reader copy or an ARC, when you hear people say ARC, that's what that means. It's a copy of the book that gets printed in advance. It still has some like mistakes, like little tiny mistakes that haven't been finally copy edited out. But it's an early copy that goes out to librarians and educators and book bloggers and reviewers and all sorts of outlets to kind of generate buzz and get the word out there about the book. And so,
Fran, how early did yours go out? So before it's published?
goodness, I want to say around January of 2022, January, February. What is time?
In the pandemic, who knows, right?
Yeah, so it was for that. They were like, we're putting this together. Can you have a note that can you put together a note for this so that people can see it? I was like, okay. And what I ended up doing was about 6 months before that, I was at a writing residency at the studios of Key West over the summer. I had just finished my my biggest set of revisions for the book, and I was completely like, my brain was toast. And when I got to Key West, so like that, one day I was feeling really emotional, and I wrote about my mother and her illness and anticipatory grief. I mean, there's actually like more to that. It became a blog post that I wrote, and when they asked 6 months later for that author's note, they were like, well, we really like what you put on your website, like you could maybe use that. And so I was like, okay, I guess. And so I revised it, I added more to it, I took some things out, I made it into I made the blog post into an author's note essentially, and I didn't think it was going to end up in the final copy, but it did. And so so yeah, it comes from a really raw place. Like it was one of those things that I sat down because, which is the book as a whole is something that, or the idea for the book is something that I was like, I feel a lot of feelings right now, and all I can do is write about it and not really care what happens. And then it turned out to be something important. So that's the story behind the author's note.
That's super interesting to me. And I think also, it's always the author's note or note to the reader. Who is the reader, right? Did you imagine your reader to be young adults and adults, everyone? Who did you think your audience was when you were writing it? Or was your audience just you? Which is right what Toni Morrison says.
Yes. That's complicated because I've always written about teenagers. Like even when I was in elementary school, I was reading like Sweet Valley High and Babysitter's Club, and like they were so cool. And so I was like writing my little versions of those stories, and I kind of never stopped. And so I've been writing young adult pretty much my whole life. Like since before I was a young adult, I like to say. And so my audience has always theoretically been teenagers, or people, but also I would add like people who are young at heart and who really resonate with that very specific coming of age, revelatory vibe that young adult books have, that young adult stories in general have, not just books, but also TV. And like some of our favorite TV shows that we're watching, like Stranger Things is a YA show. You can't tell me otherwise. It's centered around teenagers. So I guess I firstly write for like the past version of myself who was so lonely and who really didn't feel like she saw, like when you're a person of color and you're a reader and you like grow up in the United States, like you kind of, especially before today, like especially, I was born in 1985. not to date myself, but you know, when I was like 10 or 12, like and forward moving, my whole childhood pretty much, it's like all the kids in these books were white. And so, and almost everybody on TV was white. And so when you're a person of color and you're a reader and you love to read, like you just kind of have to accept that. You kind of have to accept that like you're setting this aside to like experience the world of like, even though you can't relate to that person fully, like you have to put that aside to enjoy the story, and you still do because you love to read and you love stories. So not really sure where I was going with that, but I guess there was a part of me that felt like something was missing, and I guess that's what I think about when I think about my audience.
Oh, Fran, that was great. I mean, in a way that makes sense too, that I feel like a young adult is not going to need the author's note necessarily. And yet it's really, I found it really moving to what the book was about, and just sort of grief to have that frame too. So it's for both, right?
Yeah.
You work full time.
Yeah.
How did you manage to write this book? And you're a parent. And what is your writing process like? Or you can answer any part of that.
So I'm a super slow writer, and I first had the idea for the book like 10 years ago, and I had a whole first version that I scrapped and then I put down, and I worked on other things. And every time I have an idea for a story that I want to write, and I've kind of faced the fact that I'm a novelist and not a short story writer, like that's just how my brain works, but I'm also a super slow writer on top of having all these reasons for writing slowly. I'm just naturally a slow writer. So, the answer is slowly, and then interspersed with other things. I think I write when I have like little bits of time. Like Sunday is a big day for me to write, has been for a while. And then just like random nights when I don't have demands, but I don't plan it in advance, and I don't wake up early, and I don't write every day, or I don't wake up early to write.
Thank you for saying that, right? That you could be a writer even if you're not writing every day, and even if you don't wake up early, even though a lot of people do.
Yeah.
It's not the only way, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's always good to sit down and check in with your writing process to see if there are things that you can change. Like after this, I might sit down and be like, well, maybe I should try and write faster and see how that works.
I mean, you wrote and published a book.
I know. Yes, thank you. I know I'm pretty hard on myself. So, yeah, in order to, so the thing is though that even though I am a slow writer, when I have an idea that I'm really excited about, I do put out a lot at once sometimes. Like I'll write like 10,000 words in a day if I'm really excited at the drafting stage. Excuse me. And so one thing that I do for that is actually, I'm just gonna give you a concrete tip, is that there's a program that I use called Write or Die that, yes, it's a really old school, like janky looking program that I think you can go online and use it online. You can download. I have a desktop version that I use. And basically, whenever you stop writing, you have two choices. You can, it either makes a really unpleasant noise after you've been not typing for like 15 seconds. There's settings too. It could be like 5 seconds if you're like really, living dangerously, or it could be like 30 seconds. So it makes an unpleasant noise. And then there's like a more difficult version where it actually starts deleting what you wrote after you haven't written for a certain amount of time.
Statistic program.
It is a little, but as I said, there are settings. There are settings. So you can make it like a little easier on yourself. And I think there's a pausing feature, which I've used many times. But the reason I said it's janky is because it stops working sometimes if you use the pause feature too many times. So what I've realized in using that program is that for me, the hardest thing is starting. And there were so many chapters that I used that program to write, where when I first sat down, I was like, I kind of know what happens, but I don't know. And then I would use write or die and it would just come out. And so, yeah, it helped me realize that even though I'm a slow writer, maybe I could use a little push sometimes.
Write or die, I love that. I mean, I think all of these hacks are really useful to know. I use a timer often. I'll do, just set a timer for 15 minutes because I think, or sometimes it's 5 minutes because you can write for 5 minutes and then once you get going, you can usually write longer. Dan, how much time do we have? If I have more questions, I want to make sure we have time. Okay. As I was listening to your audiobook, this sentence, or many sentences that stood out to me, but I managed to grab a pen and write this one down. And this was interesting to me because, well, for many reasons, but this, I'll start with this. Even the non-white people are white.
What part is that from? Oh wait, I know what part that's from.
Well, I mean, I'm just thinking about, and kind of what we've talked about, since you were my student very briefly in one of my best classes at Writers and Books. And I have to say, in all my years of teaching here, I really only had a handful of writers of color who were in my class. So anyway, I was thrilled to have you because you're a terrific writer. But just in terms of, one of the things that I think our city struggles with is kind of entrenched segregation, right? Economic and racial segregation. And so it was just a sentence that stood out to me, and maybe you can give a little context for it if you want.
Oh yeah.
So just to make sure, this is when a character is talking about a very white, upper middle class community, right? Yeah. So yeah, even the white people are white. It's really talking about
Even the non-white people.
even the
are white,
non-white
yeah.
people are white. So first of all, I very intentionally say things like that in my writing. I think there's in the very first few pages, there's a description of the other people who work at the ice cream stand, and there's two girls who look alike and dress alike, but they're different races. And one is Afro-Honduran and Colombian, and the other one is some kind of white. And I did that very intentionally just to be like, this is a non-white point of view. And also, more importantly, well, I don't know if it's more important than the fact that whose point of view it is, but whiteness is the default in a lot of books. And so when you don't say what someone's race is, I think that in general, we tend to assume that we're talking about a white person. And so that's why I like to put those little things there, those little descriptors. But as far as even the non-white people are white, it's referring to internalized racism and I guess assimilation that's gone too far. So I believe that the character, so this is CeCe talking about her mom moving to a new community. So one of the characters, I would say the second most important character of the whole book, CeCe, is Minerva's neighbor / drug dealer / friend. It's one of the arcs of their relationship or of those two characters is to become friends. And so, and her life is in many ways more rough than Minerva's life because she's been abandoned much longer and she doesn't have an emotional connection to either of her parents. And so that character is talking about how her mom just left the apartment that they live in together, just kind of left her on her own to move in with her boyfriend, who lives in this upper middle class, super white neighborhood. And this refers to this culture on from Queens to Long Island there's a lot of Black and brown and immigrant people and other immigrant people of color, like low-income individuals. And then there's the upper middle class, police, firefighter, administrator, like it's like a whole community. And so there's a lot of those communities on Long Island, and even in Queens. And it's, so that like little line references how some people aspire to live that life, and it sucks. Like pretty much. Yeah, what a good question. What a thought-provoking question.
Well, thanks. I mean,
I think you took it exactly actually where I meant, which was that there is this, the assumption if you don't describe is that the character is white, and the way that you described it showed this is a different point of view. Was that challenging for you in publishing when for so long, it's how do we as writers of color write about race, in ways where you're not explaining to a presumed white audience?
Yeah, I struggled with this a little bit because.
well, Fran, I should also say,
I thought you did it so well. I mean, it felt like really we're inhabiting these characters and their perspectives, and it wasn't continually looking at like, hey, are you with me? Like you were just there, and so the reader was going with you and with your characters.
Thank you. I think this is something that I have over time gotten pretty good at, of just like living. Well, first of all, I do find that one of my biggest strengths is characterization and like living in the character's point of view and like getting to know even the side characters. Because I not to sound creepy, but like I form like emotional attachments with not in a healthy way, in like a good writer way. So, like the way of a good writer, not the way of like a weirdo. But like
can it be both? I mean, weirdo and
that's
writer?
true. That's true. Sometimes weirdness is very good. But I think that I did struggle with discussing the racial background of some of the characters because so I grew up in Brooklyn, in an extremely diverse neighborhood in Brooklyn. Like if you look at my elementary school, like I have an elementary school like picture day picture from like the 2nd grade or 3rd grade, and it was like so like it looks like Sesame Street. And so like there's no like majority color or or ethnicity or nationality. It was super diverse. At one point, it was the most diverse zip code in the country, I think, Kensington, Brooklyn. So I was going with this. So I grew up with people from like all over, and I also grew up knowing people who were mixed, a lot of like mixed race or mixed nationality kids. And so Minerva herself is actually half Puerto Rican, but her father is absent. And so she's Puerto Rican and Dominican. And then you have another character who's Honduran and Colombian. And then you have another character who's like CeCe is Dominican and question mark. And, and so I thought that people would struggle with that. Like it was what I grew up with, and it's what I meet people every day with those backgrounds. And well, not every day, because I work and I have to I can't leave my house that much. So I meet people all the time of like mixed nationality. And so it makes so much sense to me. It's like, oh, this is what these characters are. Like as they came to me, like, oh yeah, this is, is normal. Like, especially, well, I won't go into that. I was gonna say, especially being influenced by like certain real life things that I came across, but that requires talking about my ice cream days, which I won't.
I don't know. I mean,
but
we certainly could.
We can. Well,
if you want. I mean, one of the questions.
If it's one of your questions.
Yeah. Well, we talked about what are things that you're inspired by as a writer or from your own background. So, I mean, however you want to answer that.
I'll get to that in a second, but yes. So anyway, so I was inspired by like real people who just sort of coalesced into these fictional characters who feel so real to me. And so, yeah, I struggled with like are people who didn't grow up in super diverse settings gonna understand that, or is it gonna be too much for them? And then at some point I just have to do like, whatever. Like if they don't get it, they don't get it. And that is what it is. But yeah, long-winded, but.
No, that's great. I mean, I think it can be really challenging to not write to the white gaze or the assumed white gaze, but it makes sense if you grew up in a place where that gaze wasn't as strong or wasn't there in the same way, that you wouldn't feel that necessarily as much. Yeah, I mean, that's a real strength, I think.
Thank you.
What's been the weirdest or most surprising thing about having your book out in the world? You must have been thinking about this for a long time, about what it might be like to publish the book. And I know when I published my first book, it was not, I'm not sure what I thought it would be like, but it wasn't, I mean, in part because it came out during a pandemic. But yeah, what's been surprising for you?
Do you want like the real answer, or do you want like
Yes. But yes, you want the real answer.
I think that, so
It's a great question. Do we want the real answer?
Yeah.
Yes.
do you want the nice answer? So the book that I wrote a book that went on submission that didn't sell to publishers before this one. And that one was way sadder, like way darker and sadder. And so when I wrote this one, I was a little bit like, eventually I just sort of fell into the writing of the book. But early on in the drafting, I was like, I need to, it's sad, but I gotta make it a little light too. Like I have to remember to have moments of lightness and joy. And especially compared to the previous book, which was so sad. And looking back, it was because I was writing it while my mother was dying. And yeah, so the thing that was surprising to me, so I was very proud of the fact that, in the end, the book does have moments of lightness and humor. And it's actually like, it's got some really funny lines, in my opinion. And so I still laugh at some of them, like when I read them. And so
Is it harder for you to write funny than to write sad, or?
It really depends on the story.
Too, I mean.
I think that it's not hard, because if I know the characters and how they talk to each other, then the banter comes out. And I'm a naturally dry humored person. So it just kind of happened. So no, not really when I know the characters, but I did have to but once I realized that that's what I was doing, I was like, lean into this if you can. And the reason that I bring that up is because sometimes the feedback that I see about the book is like, it's so sad. Wow, it's so dark. This was so tough. It's like, that was my life. Number one, except for, the drug dealing and in terms of Minerva's home life, because that's what they're talking about, it being dark and sad. And so number one, I'm like, that's my life, or that was. And then another thing is that's a lot of kids' lives. That's a lot of kids are left alone, not necessarily because they have sick parents or because, they're being neglected outright. Their parents have to work and can't watch them. And so I guess what has been surprising to me is a lot of, and I feel like it's mostly adult readers who I've noticed this from, is it seems like they don't really understand that this is real life for people. And they're just kind of commenting on it as though of course it's fiction. And that doesn't mean you can't comment about fiction. And what I mean is that this kind of feedback that I've seen makes me think it makes me surprised about other people's like naivete about how things are in the world. That's been surprising to me. Like I didn't think that I would see so much feedback of like, wow, this is really dark, because I really lightened my hand a lot for it. So that's been surprising.
Dan, how are we doing for time?
One more question.
Okay. Gosh, I have so many. I'll tell you my 2 questions and you can decide.
Sure.
So one of them has to do with writing characters and relationships that I had to do with, you know, do you write out what this, let's say what a particular character is like, or do you write into it to find out about the character? And then the other question is, I think the class you took of mine was a version of the stories you need to tell, in which you could write fiction or nonfiction. And I'm curious about your decision to choose fiction. I do think, you know, there's a kind of truth you can tell in fiction that I think is actually very hard to tell in nonfiction for me as a fiction and nonfiction writer. So yeah, those are my 2 questions about how you chose fiction instead of nonfiction, since you said, as all fiction does, right, that you're drawing from your life. And the other one has to do with characters, you know, how you create them and how you track them and how you follow them.
Yeah, I think I can answer both of those sort of at the same time. Is that I took your class to write nonfiction, even though in the final reading I chose a fiction piece to read, and that's simply because I find nonfiction so challenging. And so the reason I took the class was because I wanted to get practice and learn about writing creative nonfiction or memoir or anything along those. And it is very difficult for me. My brain wants to make it into fiction immediately. I don't know why, but if you read anything nonfiction, it reads like, almost, in my opinion, like a textbook compared to my fiction, and I don't know why. Like, and so I've just kind of accepted that my brain naturally wants to turn things into fiction, and I don't know if it's that having that control over reality or a fictional world. Because I am, you know, a bit of a control freak.
Yeah.
Whatever these days. So yeah.
No, it's true. I mean,
Yes. I just like
it's true,
crafting.
right? Like you can,
Yes.
the puppet strings, right?
Exactly.
Like the things that we can't do in the rest of our lives.
Exactly. That's perfect, because that's how I write my characters. That's how I feel about my characters, is that and so I don't sit down and like plan out my characters. It's something that just kind of comes naturally, or that's something that my brain just wants to do.
You knew the arc of the book before you started writing it, or you knew the characters?
I knew the characters. The actual arc took me a long time to figure out, although I knew that her internal,
as in the plot.
Yeah, the external conflict changed a lot, but the internal conflict was kind of always the same, of her finding her, you know, learning to not push people away, and you know, trust, like not hate her town so much, and those things. But yeah, the puppet strings, I find that it's very hard for me to work on writing a story if I don't have a good grasp on the characters. So they have to sort of come out fully formed, or I get more insights into them at a time, and when I've had enough insight, then I can go and write the story. But I don't like sit down and try to work it out. I don't do like worksheets. I just, again, I don't know if it's me being like a stubborn writer person, or if it's something else, but it's like I have to have like a certain understanding, and then I can make them do whatever. I could write another Minerva book if I had the time, and I would have a great time because I love those characters. So I have to love the characters, and then it feels like I'm getting to know them more than I'm like deciding what they're like.
So it sounds like it could be a series.
I wouldn't think of it as a series theoretically. I would think of it as like companion books, which is actually a dream of mine. Like I'm really into this other Francesca Block, who wrote Weetsy Bat and all these books. So she wrote a bunch of books in this world that takes place in Los Angeles, but it's a whole extended family that she wrote a different book for each person. And they're not really sequels, or it's not a series. They're just like companion books of one another. And I always thought that was so badass that she just created this work, kept on going. So goals.
Absolutely. How are you, Dan?
What?
Oh,
We will open it up for questions. Yeah.
sure. I have others for you, but
Yes.
Allison.
Well, I have a comment and then a question.
Okay.
So first, I've really appreciated the conversation. That I love the way you talk about yourself and your process so openly with so much humor. It's very refreshing.
Thank you.
And I want to thank Dan for, in the period of 1 week, he's brought us 2 authors who are not academics and who took a, quote, long time to write their novels. It's Robbie Mamba and now you. He writes adult fiction. And it's so wonderful to hear you and listen to you, to feel that there is some hope for those of us who are writers who don't have, in a way, the kind of structure or time that can be built into an academic profession or lifestyle work. So, one, I want to applaud you for sticking with it, and I don't think that 5 years, for instance, Robbie took 5 years to write Good Servant. I don't think of that as long, and in fact, the way his prose came out was just so kind of not one excess word, that kind of thing. And I think that taking the time with your characters is what makes your book so rich. So anyway,
Thank you.
that's a comment. My question
Thank
is
you.
if you are familiar with Laura Pegram's Quaaludes Journal of
Yes.
Color Children's Literature
Yes,
Conference, which is so wonderful.
I have been to the conference.
Okay.
It's been a few years though. I think it was pre-COVID.
Yeah, well, she's doing it virtually now. I'm on her board, so
Oh.
I just wanted to hope that you were connected with that conference in some way, because it's just become such a wonderful way to network and build community among so many brilliant writers of color. I feel like you're really changing the landscape for, juvenile YA and teen books.
Thank
Some of the best books are that very large community of writers of color and Native writers and Arab American writers. These stories that need to be told. So reconnect with Laura. I'm going to send you an email and say I had the privilege of listening.
Oh, thank you so much. So for I guess whoever's watching remotely, the question was, do I know about Quelly, the journal and the conference, the children, what is it? Writers color.
Children's literature.
Yes. So yeah, I have been to that. It was a fantastic conference. The last time I went, I had not even gone on submission yet. And I was like, wow, one day, one day. And so hopefully, yeah, I do know if she's accepting applications for
I'll just
participants
I'll
right now.
just put you 2 and 2 together in
Okay.
an email. Okay.
Okay.
Maybe jumping on to Allison's question, do you have, what's your advice for writers who aren't going that MFA route, or, I mean, because that seems often like it's put out there. Like
Yeah.
if you want to write a book, this is the thing you do, but I know lots of people with MFAs who don't have books, and also not everyone can do that route, can
Right.
afford that route, or can uproot their lives to move to someplace.
Yeah, so I have a bachelor's in creative writing that from SUNY Purchase. And the reason it's in my bio is because it's super important to me that I got that, because it was my way out of Brooklyn, because I didn't think I was going to go to college because I had messed up so royally. So that part of the book is autobiographical. It's like nobody was watching me, so I didn't go to class. And and I cut class, but I was also writing novels, and I also was like interning at like theaters in Times Square, like for some reason. So I was like doing a lot, but I was like also slacking off. And so at some point I was like, I guess I'm not going to college. And then I thought about going to the Navy. And so when I found out that SUNY Purchase had a portfolio admission, like how they really emphasized the portfolio, and I was like, oh, I have stuff, and I sent them like 50 pages because they didn't have a page count. They didn't have a work. They were just like, send us a sample, and it didn't have a number of pages to send. So I had 50 pages, and I sent it. And when I talked to my professor like years later, she was like, yeah, I still have that. That was so cute. But yeah, so that's what my degree means a lot to me. And so I don't feel like I went to an MFA, but my bachelor's program was so workshop heavy, and really did help me understand things like how to submit work, how to format work to submit, like, what workshopping is like.
Were you with, is Monica Farrell there? No.
I did take a couple classes with Monica Farrell. She was there while I was there, but she was more poetry. And so I did take a couple classes with her. I almost said Monica Lewinsky. Carol, oh my gosh, Captain Lewis was like my main professor who I worked with. But anyway, so my BA means a lot to me. And so I really, for a good few years of my 20s, thought I was gonna apply to MFA programs. Was like researching them and like reading about the different ones. And then at some point I was like, I had a kid, and I think that was really when I was 26, I had a child and a baby. And I think that after that, it was not going to be a thing. I just didn't return to that idea. And eventually I'm glad, because I use a lot of my experience working in human services to understand how systems work. And I use that in my work, and that too is important to me. So I have no regrets. And so to answer the question, my advice would simply be to keep working on your craft and to read as much as possible. And we say that a lot, but it really is true. And if only because if you ever meet me and you tell me that you write but you don't read, I will judge you. So that's a great reason to read if you're trying to be a writer. And so definitely like work on your craft and connect authentically with other writers whose work you enjoy and who are doing things that you are interested in. Like, don't connect because you think it's going to help you. Connect because you're interested in what they're doing, and those connections will definitely come back and help you. And like the blurb that Dan read earlier from Nova Rensuma, I took a workshop with her, and that's how she knew me. And so those little connections really do add up and help. But they have to be authentic, or people will know, and it'll look bad if you are self-serving. So
Absolutely. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, this is a good follow-up question. What books and other writers did you look to for inspiration for what's coming to me?
I was really inspired by, Mindy McGinnis wrote a book called The Female of the Species, which is a young adult novel from a good few years ago. That is part of it is about a girl getting revenge on her sister's murderer. And so that revenge, that was the first book that I think I read that I was like, oh wow, this is very dark for YA. I didn't realize that YA could go this dark. And then I was thinking about like the ice cream stand and the abusive boss, and like it gave me ideas. So that was a big one. In general, I really enjoy Jasmine Ward and Toni Morrison, and the book White Oleander. I read it like every few years because the mom is an artist who went to prison, and my dad was an artist who went to prison, and that was like still the only book I can think of about an artist who goes to prison, like that's fiction and like from the child's perspective. Yeah, there's a lot. I would say that if I could just look at my blurb list, because my brain is like, yeah, so Gabby, A Girl in Pieces by Isabel Quintero, Sarah Nicole Lemon, Done Dirt Cheap. Like, so we reached out to all of these authors because there was like an authentic connection to the work. And so like Erika Worth, definitely, not White Horse, which is her next book coming out, but Crazy Horse's Girlfriend was I read that book after I wrote this, and I was like, there's so many parallels. Like it looks like I lifted some things from it, and it's like I did not. So I really resonate with Erika T. Worth's work, and Stephanie Kean, her early work as well. And the book that she just came out with, We Weren't Looking to Be Found. I really want to read it because it's about recovery. But yeah, I would take a look at the blurb list. I'm not to be lazy, but my brain is like blanking. It's like when someone asks your favorite book and it's like, you know what I'm saying? Thank you. Yes. Oh.
You mentioned that you basically feel you're a novelist, most of a short story. Basically, I'm intimidated by not by written things or stories. Basically, say, story by book by novel by stories is one. Basically, not, you know, I say, find a story with progression. But when I'm looking at this, why aren't you? You started out quite early. Decided you were a novelist. You had some concept of the two.
Yeah. Excuse me. Well, I'm actually intimidated by short stories, and as I've said, creative nonfiction. And I think it's because my brain just bucks against those ways of writing, I think. And so I don't know. I mean, writing a book is like, you know, I think that most people who endeavor to write books, like a book length work, at some point are just like, forget this. I'm not doing this anymore because it's just so much work. It's so many strands that have to come together. And it's like, even writing down, you know, 80,000 words by themselves is a lot, but like for those words to have to make sense with one another, like that's just like a whole other beast. And so I think it's just, for me, it's like wanting to tell that story and having that finished product in mind, that finished story that I wanted to tell, like having that be my guiding light, and not being done, and not being satisfied until I was done.
That's what
I think. Yeah.
the big story, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like, so as I said, like being a slow writer, it's like the characters in the story really have to sort of not let me go for me to want to keep working on it. And I think a lot of people can relate to that. So if there's an idea that keeps coming back, and I keep having new insights on it, like it's just not gonna let me, like I'm just not gonna, like a part of me is like not gonna be okay until it's out and like a solid thing that I can then work on. So yeah, it's just an internal drive. I don't know how to
Sounds like
market that and sell it.
Sounds like we don't belabor the issue.
I mean, I try. Like I definitely, like I do some outlining and but I think, yeah, it's like wanting to have that finished product in mind, like wanting to see that what's in my mind in front of me, like is the biggest driver.
Are we, you know, make sure that you get what's coming to me. I want to
Thank you.
thank Writers and Books, and also just to say that community writing classes are so important. I did an MFA, Fran did not, but I've learned so much from taking community classes and in teaching them, you know, and that's how we connected. And I think for anyone who's interested in furthering their writing in any way, not just through writing a book, but, you know, get this book and community writing classes. What can I say?
It's really important.
It's really important.
It's important to connect with other writers and just not write in a vacuum. Just don't do that. Don't
Yeah.
write in a vacuum. To write, what I mean by writing in a vacuum is to write and never show anyone it and to never connect with other writers, to never, yeah, just to write alone and never share it is the short answer. Thank you.